My name is Dale Smith. We're continuing the classes. Our last class we talked about the 144,000 witnesses. This is taking place during the 7 years of tribulation. Now we're going to talk about this one is called the Great Earthquake. Now that's what's coming up near the end, near this period of time, near the end of the 7 years. There's a great earthquake coming, and I want to describe to you about earthquakes. Now, I don't know how many of you have been in earthquakes. I've been in several earthquakes. I was raised in Southern California, and I went through many, many earthquakes, different ones. The Northridge earthquake that was taken years ago. But anyhow, I'm going to be talking about that, about earthquakes, because earthquake is going to be coming, and we need to be prepared. Now, I'm going to be talking about the earthquake that took place at 5:13 in the morning on April the 18th, 1906. This is a great, huge earthquake that took place in San Francisco in 1906, in the spring of 1906. And so I'm going to talk about that because that will give you an idea of what earthquakes are like for some of these who haven't gone through them, so they know what, you know. So this one here, I'm going to be talking in detail. There's some interesting business in here that I'll tell you about too, and then some different things about earthquakes and what they do. Okay, now Revelation 16 verse 18, Revelation 6 verse 12, Revelation 8 verse 5, Revelation 11 verse 13 and 19. Among the earthquakes, there are usually fires, tsunamis. Earthquakes travel at a rate of 2 miles a second. In 1 second time, earthquake has gone 2 miles. During the end of the last half of the tribulation, and we've been talking about that, a great earthquake will occur. This will probably be the worst earthquake ever. This great earthquake, quoting, is mentioned in Revelation, noting the above scripture. Throughout history, earthquakes have been recorded, some more severe than others. Animals seem to have a sixth sense when earthquakes is about to happen. About 2 o'clock in the morning, James Hopper, a reporter who just got through listening to Greg Caruso's performance in San Francisco, was walking home from the opera. As he was walking past the livery stable, he heard a horse bellowing and scores of hoofs crashing against the stall. He couldn't understand the reason for the animal's nervous behavior. Another man was out riding and didn't know why his horse was acting nervously. He said he had never seen his horse act like that before. Also, there was a chorus of barking dogs in the neighborhood. The animals, unlike humans, could somehow feel the small, almost unnoticeable sounds in the earth, and then it happened. 3 hours after these animals, at 5:13 in the morning on April the 18th, 1906, an earthquake hit San Francisco. The animals sensed it was coming, but only could react by acting unusual. It lasted 40 seconds. The second shock came a little while later, lasting 25 seconds. It was fiercer than the first shock. San Francisco lies between two earthquake faults, the Hayward and more threatening the San Andreas, and that's the one that comes down to Southern California. The world's longest fault line, at more than 600 miles long, reaching from the Mexican border north to San Francisco. Strong earthquakes have struck there in 1836, 1865, 1868, but occur rarely. Earthquakes in San Francisco have only a few residents that lived there at those times, and fewer buildings were damaged. The earthquake traveled at a speed of 2 miles a second. Buildings were torn off their foundation. The state insane asylum near San Jose was a tragic loss of life. Over 100 inmates and attendants were buried in a mountain of debris. Since there was no other buildings, the inmates were so scared and uncontrollable that those who were saved were tied to trees to keep them from hurting others, hurting themselves and others. The quake's rupture was 300 miles of the San Andreas Fault. It was felt along the Pacific coast from Coos Bay, Oregon to Los Angeles, and as far east as central Nevada. Now listen, the giant redwoods are 200 miles north of San Francisco along the San Andreas Fault and could live in one spot for up to 3,000 years. This is a tree growing, a redwood tree growing. Now, the bark on the tree is fireproof, so they don't burn. There's nothing except one thing that can bring these trees down. Yet, when a big earthquake hits there, it can uproot and hurl a monstrous tree through the air like a missile. California is unique when it comes to trees. The tallest in the world are these giant redwoods in the northern part of the state, near the coast. The giant sequoias are the largest trees in the world. And along the eastern border of California, next to Nevada, are the White Mountains, where the oldest living things live. The ancient bristlecone pine tree. I've seen many of them. The oldest is 4,700 years old, still going, 4,700 years old. But it only stands about 30 feet tall. It's not a big tree. They are about 1,000 to 1,500 years older than the sequoias and the redwoods, which are 3,000 to 3,500 years old. Between the sequoia forest and the ancient bristlecone lies Mount Whitney, the tallest mountain in the lower 48s, reaching a height of 14,497 feet. And 100 miles southeast of Mount Whitney is Death Valley, the lowest point in the Western Hemisphere, 288 feet below sea level, with the second highest recorded temperature of 134 degrees in 1934. Now, Mount Whitney and Death Valley are in the same county. They exist in the same county. Now, here's another story that took place about this man that had a business in San Francisco, and he lived a few miles away. And I want you to tell his story because some of you may belong to his business today. Amadeo Giannani was determined not to cash a single dollar. He was head of his bank in San Francisco. He nicknamed the bank the People's Bank and told his clients that their money was safe with him. Amadeo lived in San Mateo, 17 miles away from San Francisco, when the earthquake hit. He rushed to his bank, which was still standing with little damage. The vaults were unhurt. He removed the cash to a wagon, but was worried that he'd be stopped by the police, that if he was, and be shot, claiming that he was looting money. Also, thieves could rob him of his bank valuables of $80,000 in cash and gold. He piled sacks of records and other items on top of the cash and rushed home. Fortunately, he wasn't stopped. His career and his customers' belongings were entrusted in his care. In fact, the whole future of his bank laid in that wagon. His name was Mr. Amadeo Giannani. His bank was the Bank of Italy, which today it is called Bank of America. So some of you may have, but this is a future of what happened to this bank. The death toll estimated was about 3,000 deaths from this earthquake. but other estimates claim it was 5 to 10,000 victims. Thousands were injured. The buildings that weren't destroyed were burned by fire. Kerosene and oil lamps were tossed to the floors and started burning. Whole families disappeared. The city's water system underground was cut off. No buildings burnt to the ground. 490 city blocks in a portion of 32 others. The earthquake and fire consumed 28,000 buildings worth up to $5 million at that time, which is 1/3 of the taxable property income in California. The business district, transportation, 3/5 of the city's homes and lodging houses were destroyed, not excluding almost every bank, principal hotel, wholesale houses, public and private libraries, art galleries burned. Telegraph Hill, Russian Hill, Nob Hill, Chinatown, and the Barbary Coast in San Francisco burned in ashes in the slopes and the hills and the valleys. Sergeant Leonard Ingham on April 16th walked into a Hartford fire insurance company and asked for a $2,000 fire policy. He shocked the company official by predicting that in 2 days, on April the 18th, they would owe him $2,000. He not only predicted the fire, but drew a diagram of the area that would be destroyed, and he was exactly right. He predicted the San Francisco earthquake right to the day, 2 days before it took place. Here's a picture, I don't know if you can see this, of some of the destruction that took place there in San Francisco. It was pretty gruesome. Let me show you this a little more too. The bottom picture shows a picture of a horse, and the top picture shows the roadway divided with the earthquake splitting apart. Today, the great earthquake that is prophesied in Revelation will take place during the second half of the tribulation. This is the closest set time Revelation has given to us. Let's look into the great earthquake of Revelation 16, verse 12, 13, 15, and 17. And here we go. And I beheld when I opened the sixth seal, and lo, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became dark as sackcloth of hair, and the moon became blood, and the stars of the heavens fell to the earth. And the kings of the earth, and the great men, and the rich men, the chief captains, the mighty men, even bondmen, free men, hid themselves in the dens and the rocks of the mountains, and said to the mountains and rocks, fall on us, and hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of his wrath is come, and who shall be able to stand? At the beginning of the sixth seal was the great earthquake. We see that the evil kings of the earth, etc., the enemy of God and God's people, whom they persecuted, has now had a sudden change of heart. Their thoughts were awakened in every heart, intense interest in divine things instead of the world they control. Their conscience caught their attention with great consequences of their former actions, and thereby acknowledged their nothingness before God's throne. They had decided to hide themselves in dens and rocks, hoping that the rocks would fall upon them instead. They had realized that they had better to be killed by rocks than endure the wrath of the Lamb. Yet they did not know the Scriptures. In 1 Corinthians 10:4, it says, "For them drank of that spiritual rock that followed him, and that rock was Christ." Either way, the rock will destroy them. The wrath of God is part of the desolation Daniel described in chapter 9, verse 26 and 27. And at the end of the last war, Armageddon, desolations are determined. Destruction is imminent. And in the midst of the week, halfway of the 7 years, the overwhelming of abomination, he will make it desolate. After the great earthquake, the wrath will come, and who shall be able to stand? I'm sharing this with you because earthquake is just one of the portions. There's fire coming. There's all kinds of different stuff coming. And I still have a little bit more to read. But this earthquake is something we need to... I've been in many, many earthquakes all my life when I lived in California. And so just kind of sharing this with you, especially this thing with the Bank of America owner who saved his bank. There would be no Bank of America today if he would have lost his money in there. Okay, got a little bit more. The first event of this sixth seal is a great earthquake. So a great sound of thunder will be heard from underground, and immediately afterwards a violent shock will take place over a great area, shaking and destroying everything in its path. Great waves across the earth will knock everything to the ground. Buildings, foundations, trees, animals, humans. In a small comparison, on November 1st, 1755, in Lisbon, Spain, a violent earthquake struck, and within 6 minutes, 60,000 people perished. The greater part of that city was thrown down. The sea nearby first retired, leaving the beach barren without water for a short time, and then the surf rolled back in, raising 50 feet above the ordinary sea level. This was a tsunami, which often follows an earthquake, depending on the severity. So if an earthquake near an ocean will cause a tsunami to come to some degree, plus if the fire that follows allows destroying buildings, water, gas, and electric systems, ships and boats in large whirlpools can be swallowed up, never to be seen again. Large cracks in the ground can open up and swallow everything in its path. Then, as violently as it opened, usually it closes, disappearing with everything that had fallen into it. Also, there are large earthquakes. After large earthquakes, the sun can become darkened by the debris and the dust blown into the sky, covering the sun's light. Maybe this is what happened, what it means. It says that the sun became dark and the moon became blood, which red smoke from fire following the earthquake could mean the red blood. Other acts of God are volcanoes. In April 10th, 1815, a volcano erupted in Zimbabwe in Indonesia called Timbora. The ashes and volcanic dust, particles ejected into the Earth's atmosphere and sky, caused a plunge of the Earth's temperature for over a year. Joseph Smith Sr. lost his crops in the volcanic fallout, forcing him to move his family to Palmyra, New York, within 4 miles of Hilcomore. I sometimes wonder if the volcano had not erupted, whether or not Joseph Smith Jr. would have remained where he had previously been living. Another act of God took place November 13th, 1833. A meteor shower fell from the sky, and the whole country was covered by this fiery commotion lasting 3 hours. Some were so scared that the day of judgment was believed to have only waiting the sunrise. Only these acts of God are only to get our attention. We don't know when these events will take place. This is why we are to prepare in every way: food, clothes, personal items, drinks, and some assurance, being like the 5 wise, taking the Holy Spirit to be our guide. It might be his covenant people that will be hid in the days of the wrath. Zephaniah 2, verse 1 through 3. Halley's Comet was discovered by Edom Halley, who lived from 1656 to 1742. He was an astronomer. Samuel Clemens Mark Twain was born in 1835 when Halley's predicted comet appeared. Samuel lived 76 years just when Halley's Comet reappeared at the end of his life in 1910. The last time Halley's Comet appeared was in 1986, and it's scheduled for 76 years longer. In California forests, there's only one thing that topples these giant redwoods and sequoias, some 200 and 300 feet, and it's an earthquake. It can send these large trees like a missile through the air. How then do we pay the price that Jesus volunteered his life as a ransom so we might live again with him? How can we pay the price for the atonement? He is only asking us to give us our life in service. The cost is paying attention to God, to his holy, only begotten Son, and keeping his commandments so our lives will become priceless to him. And that's the end of that particular lesson. Thank you. I appreciate you listening to these. Anyhow, thank you very much. I appreciate it.